Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the Pink 'Un, where today we're reacting to Norwich City's Championship fixtures for the 2025-26 season. They have just been confirmed about a minute ago, so I'll quickly dive into some of the highlights. So the first three games are Millwall at home. Of course, the first day, as it's currently set, is the 9th of August, although that could change, and indeed all of these could change because of TV changes and Sky Sports games, which will be announced, I think, fairly soon. So it's Millwall at home on the first day, then Portsmouth away in the second game, Middlesbrough at home in the third. Ipswich, of course, will come back to Carrow Road for the first East Anglian derby, or for the second East Anglian derby, as it is since 2024, because the first is away at Portman Road on the 4th of October this year. Then the Carrow Road game is on the 11th of April. So, yeah, plenty to break down there. And, of course, give us your reaction in the comments down below, wherever you are. Let us know what you think of those. The festive schedule goes as follows as well. On Boxing Day, it's Charlton at home at Carrow Road. 29th of December, Watford visit Norfolk, and the 1st of January, obviously New Year's Day, it's a trip to QPR for Norwich. So some nice local fixtures, as obviously is customary at this or at that time of year. But two home fixtures thrown in there around Christmas as well is a huge positive. As Jeffman has said, liking the look of Charlton at home on Boxing Day. Always nice, of course, to remain in Norfolk the day after Christmas. And yeah, I think obviously a promoted side, and one of the key themes coming out of these fixtures and the analysis from it is that you probably don't know too much about what sides are going to look like at this stage, but a promoted side on Boxing Day, of course, always has the potential to be positive. I think Millwall at home in the first game isn't necessarily going to be an easy one. I think they're a team who obviously have tended to be around the sort of a similar level for the last few years. Obviously struggled a little bit with sort of a fight against relegation to an extent in the 2023-24 season, but you'd expect them to be in and around similar areas to Norwich, if not sort of slightly closer to that mid-table area, if all goes to plan in terms of Norwich aiming for the playoffs and sort of getting in there. Just to dive back into the fixtures and look at what it's looking like towards the end of the season. So the last game on Saturday, the 2nd of May, is scheduled to be Hull away. The final home game of the season, of course, if Norwich don't manage to get into the playoffs or even do better than that and achieve automatic promotion, is Saturday, the 25th of April at home against Swansea City. So I think if you look at those fixtures at critical times, of course, the first three being Millwall, Portsmouth and Middlesbrough, and then the last two being those games against Swansea and Hull. With the way that those sides looked last season, you'd say that that's probably relatively favourable. But again, it's quite early to predict. I think Norwich will be very pleased with the transfer business they've done so far. And if you probably compared their squad to others in the league right now, then they're looking really, really strong. But of course, it's worth noting that Borja Sainz is likely to leave with a lot of interest in his services. Josh Sargent is one that sort of hangs in the balance. But I think if you asked most Norwich fans right now to commit to either side, they'd say that he's probably likely to leave. So it's still certainly a lot to play out. Norwich have made a really fast start to the transfer window. So I think if you compare them to most of these sides right now, then it's looking quite good. So yes, an interesting one, of course, with all the developments that will take place. The transfer window doesn't close until right at the start of September. So it could be that even in those first few games, Norwich have an incomplete side. The teams they're playing are incomplete. So probably that August period is going to be the least predictable in terms of how then things pan out for the rest of the season. But I think as far as a daunting start could have been for Liam Manning, you look at those first few fixtures and I think he'll feel confident that he can make a strong start. Of course, the most important part of this is probably the fact that Norwich now have some fixtures to just put on that calendar. And although they've obviously always known when the first game of the season is likely to be, they can have that sort of tangible goal now that obviously they're working towards during the pre-season. So just to take you through that pre-season and how it unfolds before then, that first game of the season on the 9th of August, it's Northampton at Colney behind closed doors on the 12th of July. Then 4 days later, they'll fly out to the Netherlands, and on the 19th, they'll play their first game on tour against Volendam. Now, they're going to have two different squads playing on the same day on two different occasions in the Netherlands. Volendam and Zulte Waregem on that first day. So the first one is at 11 a.m. The second one is at 6 p.m. And it's worth noting that the under-21s are travelling out with them. So probably there will be a few of them thrown in alongside the first team players just for numbers reasons mainly. Then 25th of July, they face Olympiacos and then Den Haag in the same day. And then they come back to home soil, first of all facing Breda at 11 a.m. On the 2nd of August at Colney, again behind closed doors. And then the same opposition at 3 p.m. At Carrow Road on the same day. I think probably the reason why so many of those games have been packed into such a short period of time is because Johannes Torup wanted more time to work with the players on the training pitch. I don't think he was as fussed about pre-season games as maybe a lot of coaches would be, but Liam Manning's obviously come in. He'll want to see and assess that squad in a game environment. And although, of course, they will be having, competitive fixtures internally and in their training sessions, I think you learn a lot more about players, even in friendlies, from that competitive environment. He'll want to give them more of a chance to get used to the way that he does things and sort of his tactics at Norwich. So I think they have had to act quite quickly to cram in a few more games. And to my mind, that's probably the right idea. So that's how pre-season looks. Of course, the last game on the 2nd of August, a week before then, they return to Carrow Road against Millwall at home on the 9th as things stand. Just to dive into some of your comments right now, Finley says the East Anglian derby is at home on his birthday. Hope it gets moved to the Sunday. Well, it's an interesting way of looking at things. Of course, if it does get moved, then you'll probably be saved, or you'll definitely be saved any potential heartbreak that would come from defeat. But think about how incredible a birthday it would be if they did win that one. Watford on the 29th of December again. I must say, it's all a bit of a blur going back to last season, but I'll take your word for it that was the case last year. DRG says, don't think it's the easiest start, but I don't know if I'm basing that off last season's results. I think probably we all are at this stage, right? And any analysis that comes is going to have to factor in almost entirely what happened last season. But there are certain clubs you look at it and you say, yes, they'll almost definitely be towards the top end, or they'll be aiming for promotion. You look at the relegated sides, and that will certainly be the case. And then there are others. I think Portsmouth is probably the easiest one to start off with by saying, which end of the table they're going to be at. I think they've got a fantastic head coach and they've got some good players, but I think it will be hard for them to be pushing for sort of the playoffs or promotion next season. But we all saw how difficult Fratton Park can be last season, so definitely no guarantees there. I think any start can be tough, to be honest. He says, sitting on the fence, but there are definitely games that you'd want to avoid to start off with, as far as being thrown in at the deep end a little bit for Liam Manning. Probably the Ipswich games were front and centre in those ones, and probably also the other relegated clubs. Really, so I think they've done well just to avoid those. I say done well. They've been lucky to avoid those more tricky games just right at the start, when obviously Manning will be first of all, leading this team for the first time, but also trying to show to his new fan base exactly what he's all about and trying to make a good impression there. Wolf 39 says the last three fixtures look winnable if we need some kind of run in. Yeah, I think Hull particularly are quite hard to predict. They're a team that sort of goes up and down almost every season, it seems. Obviously, they challenged for the playoffs under Liam Rossinier, and then we're in a real relegation dogfight last season. So I would say that's probably one of the harder ones to predict. But based on last season, particularly the last two games, Swansea and Hull, I think they could probably be harder. Derby County, the one before Swansea in the midweek as well. So yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting period before those two, because Ipswich visit Carrow Road on the or as it stands, on the Saturday, the 11th of April. And then a week later, it's a trip back to Bristol City for Liam Manning and his coaching staff. So it definitely gets quite juicy going into those final 3 games. So hopefully the confidence is sort of intact going into those last few ones. I think we've had a question from Finley about the pre-season games. Would Manning take both games, or will Hogg take one? There is, so on the tour, there are 7-hour gaps between the games. Obviously, back in Norwich, it's slightly tighter turnaround, 4-hour gap. But I think there has been an effort made so that all fans can attend different games and can, don't have to miss out on one, so that they can go to the others. And I'd be surprised if Liam Manning wasn't included in those considerations. I think if maybe he'd been at Norwich for 4 or 5 years, then you could say, yeah, just let Hogg lead things and get some fitness into the players. But I think he'll be keen to watch these players at close quarters as much as he possibly can. So I'd be surprised if Manning wasn't leading all of those. Probably the 2 Breda games are where that might become a little bit of a tricky logistics question, but ultimately it's not too far from Colney to Carrow Road, obviously, and I'd be surprised if he wasn't in charge or on the touchline for any of those. Robin says, could have been worse. We could have played Southampton. Yeah, as I said, the fact that they've avoided those relegated sides and, they haven't got that quite clearly tricky start to things, I'd say. Obviously, you do find in some scenarios when those teams come down that you can catch them cold. I think it was a bit of that case when Norwich drew 4-4 with Southampton away from home in the 2023-24 season. Should have won that one, really, with a late Christian Fastnacht goal. But I think overall the quality of those teams and those clubs is obviously going to be significant this season. So the fact that Norwich have managed to avoid that one is probably a positive, and ultimately I'd say that for all of the relegated clubs. Aaron says, don't forget about the Carabao Cup game to distract us from the league, the highlight of the early season. I do find it, to be honest, an interesting one. The first Carabao Cup game, because you get to see a lot of the players who maybe haven't had as many minutes in the first team, who you'd like to have seen more of in pre-season. And I think actually that from memory, it was Stevenage in the second round, whatever round Norwich enter first. It was Stevenage at home last season, and there were a few of those sort of fringe players who you were able to assess. So I think the first round of the Carabao Cup is always really interesting, and looking forward to seeing who that is. Another comment saying, really happy about the first and last fixtures. Could have been a lot worse. Yeah, that's kind of my takeaway. I feel like you can't assess completely accurately how good these teams are going to be, but you certainly have a few that you'd like to avoid. And I think Norwich have certainly avoided those, not only in the first and last fixtures, but in the first sort of few weeks and then the last few weeks. So I think their start and their running right now look okay, but ultimately it is the Championship. And as I always find myself saying in these sort of fixture analyses, it's very hard to predict, certainly at this stage, what each team in the Championship is going to look like. So yeah, probably one where we have to wait and see to a certain extent how well Norwich are going to get on in those first few games and last few games. Obviously last season, we all would have been saying Oxford away, a promoted side, a new ground, sounds pretty exciting. And then that was up there with the worst Norwich performances I've seen in a good while. So certainly too early to say 100% what things are going to look like. But I think you combine the fact that they have avoided those more difficult fixtures or those bigger clubs, should we say, in the first few weeks and the last few weeks, and the fact that they've made a really good start in the transfer market, probably does lend itself to optimism at this stage. And of course, still very active in the transfer market, Vladan Kovacevic getting very close to a move. Wingers, of course, a priority now going forward, with Sainz expected to leave and a central midfielder wanted as well. Norwich will be looking at potential replacements for Josh Sargent in case he does go. Also, although our understanding is that one won't be recruited until sort of as and when Josh Sargent were to depart. So that's certainly one to keep an eye on. Plenty to look at before that first game of the season on the 9th of August against Millwall at home. And that's why Pinken.com and the Pinken app are the best places to go to follow those. So if you haven't already subscribed, Pinken.com/subscribe, the best place to be, and you won't miss any of that. Thank you very much for joining me this afternoon. I was going to say this morning. It feels a bit strange that it's come out at 12 o'clock. Thank you very much for joining me. If you're arriving late, then you can go back and watch the full thing on our YouTube channel or in the Pinken app. Thank you very much, as I said, for watching today. And we'll be back very soon, I'm sure, with more coverage of this very busy summer. Have a good afternoon. See you later.